Okay, hello YouTube. I had an outlet go out yesterday, and I want to share some of the things that I learned. I had an outlet outside go bad. It wasn't working. I checked it with the multimeter. It simply just wasn't working. I took it off. The wires weren't working. I tried I jumped into a more complicated situation before testing some pretty simple things, but not necessarily that obvious. Okay. Here's what it was. See that test and reset button? The test button was in, which means this was off. I was cleaning it and I had pushed that button. I didn't realize it. And what I also didn't realize was further down the line, every other outlet was turned off because of this one. I thought it only turned it off to this one, but I didn't even know it wasn't even off. Every outlet down the line, including the one I couldn't figure out was off. So it's not completely obvious because they're strung in lines. It's not completely obvious to me that this would shut off the ones down the line. So I'm jumping to the more complicated situations first and checking. Of course, I checked the breaker. That was the first thing I checked, and I checked the points up from common to the breaker wire, and it was fine. There's nothing wrong with it. So the first thing you do is you check your your breaker wire. And then you check, long story short, if you want to get this done really fast, hopefully you have the same problem and you just need to go check these. If you know where the lines go, check the first thing that isn't working in that line, which in this case was this. This is the first thing that isn't working. Also, check these. Sometimes you don't realize that the outlet is hooked up to a light switch. We don't check it because we don't realize it's hooked up because it's always on. And then when it goes out, we jump to a more complicated situation when it was just a light switch or this. These things aren't necessarily always obvious the first time around. Okay, go check those things. If it's not those things, then watch the rest of the video. Okay, I'm assuming you checked those things and it didn't work. Now, electricity is pretty simple. It shouldn't be that big of a deal. Like my house, which is relatively modern, it's 1974. It's pretty much up to code. The wiring looks pretty good. Everything is ran in lines. These things are ran in lines. It goes from a light to something else, to an outlet, to an outlet, to an outlet, and something will branch off and go another way. This thing branches off and goes at least 3 different ways. So if you checked it and that's what it wasn't, it could also be a wire that's off in the back, or something else. But where it's going to be is inside the outlets or the lights. You're not going to have to rip out drywall. It's going to be in one of these things. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to figure out the line, where it goes, and what the last thing that's on, and the first thing that isn't on. And it's between those two junction points. My house is relatively modern. First thing I did was I went upstairs. I jumped to the more complicated situation first when the thing wasn't working. First I checked the breaker, which it wasn't. Then I went upstairs and I looked for rats, which to me is just something I'm always worried about. They're going to chew through the wires or something. It wasn't rats. There was no rats, no rat smell, nothing. And like I said, my house is pretty modern, so there's no crazy wire nut situations upstairs where the wires go this way and that, and it doesn't really look up to code, which is, that's the way older houses are. They just are. All the junction points in modern houses are in an outlet or in a junction box. That's the way they're supposed to be. The wire nuts should be out here. Any open wire should be behind something that is safe, that is a harder material, that will not easily ignite the fluff behind the walls. So if you did what I told you to do and it wasn't working, then we're going to have to jump to the next situation, which is the breaker, but you don't know the line. If you know the breaker, but you don't know the line, I wrote everything down so I know the line. And I wrote the breaker down. I lost the paper to the lines and which way the lines went, but I knew the breaker. I could see it just barely written on there. It said outside outlet. The outside outlet is the one that doesn't work. So, by finding the line, you go to the first thing that isn't working and the last thing that is working in that line, and it's somewhere in there. It has to be, because the thing that's working has juice, and the thing that's not working doesn't have juice. So why isn't there juice from... Here's how my line goes. The breaker box is on the other side of this wall. It goes up through the ceiling, and I know because I've been up there before a few times. It goes to this switch first, which then goes to that light, and then it goes to this fire alarm, which is hardwired in. And then it goes that way to the thing we just discussed. It goes that way to a light, to one light that's outside, and in here to a light that's also on a... Now let's discuss this line that goes in here. This is the first thing that wasn't working. And in this case, this was also the culprit, if you will, because I pushed the button. I'm not supposed to do that. It could have been that fire extinguisher, that something could have come loose up there. But like I said, keep it simple. It's going to be something that naturally regulated. Wire nuts generally don't come off if you don't have rat problems. And, they generally, they can. It's 120 degrees today. Heating and cooling. They can come off. I'm not saying they don't. But check the simplest things first. Okay, under this case, we know the line. So, like I said, go to the last thing that works and the first thing that doesn't work, and it's in there. It was in here, the first thing that didn't work. And in other situations, it really can't be anything else. Now, here's a worse scenario where you don't even know, okay, you don't even know where the breaker, you don't even know which breaker, which, I don't know where most of my breakers go. I just drank a lot of coffee one day and I wrote everything down on a piece of paper, lost the paper, but it was written on the junction box. In this scenario, you don't even know the breaker. So how do you figure out what's in the line or what's where? In this case, you go backwards because you have to start at your point of knowledge. Here's the first point. Here's the last point in this line, the thing that didn't work yesterday. Okay, that's the last point in the line. And because I crawled through my ceiling, I knew it all the way, and I could see it going to this. When the breaker was on, that little green light was on. When the breaker was off, that green light was off. Oh, but in this case, you don't know which breaker it is. But we know that this is connected because we just crawled through the ceiling. I didn't actually crawl, I just showed you. By common sense, I could see when I was up in the ceiling that at this point, it went over to that direction. Common sense would say, that's what it is. It's that. So, I turned breakers on and off until this thing went on and off. Then I knew that was the breaker in the line for that thing. So, I turned every other breaker on and that breaker off and started checking things. And I could tell because there were wires that went here to this, and everything else, those lights work just fine. This did not. So I knew what was going on. I figured the line out by following it backwards. Now, if you're and then I figured out it was like I said, I jumped to the more complicated situation and realized it was the most simple, well, pretty simple, not necessarily obvious, but simple. Okay, that's how you figure out what's wrong with electricity. For the simple man. Now, there's no need for me to take... It could also have been a wire on the back. It could have been, a wire could have fell off this one. A wire could have fell off my, the out part of the fire alarm. Just go to the point, the last point that did work and the first point that doesn't work. And you'll figure it out. There's something missing in there because the last thing worked, it has juice, the next thing doesn't. Now, I am not an electrician. I know how to work on wires. It's common sense. You turn everything off. You know, I mean, there's nothing complicated about wiring. Just pay attention to it. You don't touch live wires. So if you don't know how to take one of those off, you know, then watch another video because there's tons of videos with, you know, people who will show you how to take these off. It doesn't matter. They're out there. This is the common sense part that electricians don't tell you when they go into their more, you know, they usually get called when it's a more difficult situation. They don't really explain the simple situations because they're not called for simple situations. These are the simple situations that you need to check before, like I did yesterday, jumped into the more complicated situations. And really, you know, I wish I would watch the video and then somebody said, hey, push this button. So I hope it helps you. I hope you only had to watch the first part of this video and not the whole thing. You know, and I hope you understand the common sense I'm trying to explain. Run it backwards if you know where it doesn't work, or go forwards if you know where it does work. Just find the line. Find the last thing that works and the first thing that doesn't work. The break is somewhere in between. It should not be in the drywall. People should not put wire nuts and things in the drywall. Now, the reason I did this so that you could just go check the thing was, you know, you don't need to sit there and watch me take, you know, 5 minutes to take this off, and I get tired of it too. When he's trying to explain something to you and you get to watch him take that thing off for 5 minutes, drop every single screw, you know, that stuff's pretty common sense. You should, you know, it's pretty easy to, there's a ton of people that will show you how to take those things off. They'll show you how to check your breaker. The breaker is actually very easy to check. You just check the common wire and the wire to the breaker. There's two wires in here. Three if you include the ground, but the two hot wires are black and white, or grayish, black and grayish. The black should be the one that is under switch, and the white one is common. And if you look in your breaker box, you'll see a strip of white wires, and then on each breaker, there's one wire. Common sense is, if you don't know the breakers are going to be lower ones, like 20 watts, and you know, 20 single watt breakers and 15 single watt breakers. It's not going to be 30 watt breaker. You might have one 30 watt breaker that goes for like your garage, you know, to run your air compressor. But for the most part, and they're not going to be doubles. The doubles go to stoves and things. So, you know, just use common sense. It's gonna, these are generally low wattage or low amperage. They're not the 30s. They're certainly not the double 30s. They're just like the 15s and the 20s singles. So, you know, try to figure out what things are, and it's simple. It shouldn't be hard. It shouldn't frustrate you. If you get frustrated, take a break and think about it, because it is simple. That's what I learned every time I do something. I always jump to the more complicated. So hopefully you only watched the beginning of the video, and you didn't have to watch me rattle on. But hopefully it makes sense to you. Good luck, and hey, if you make a video, try to help people. All right, bye.